Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Howie Scott, and my buddy Steve is here with me again today for another webinar dealing with topics that we've had over the past couple months now. I think we're up to number 34 on this webinar series. So really excited about that. Excited to have you guys here. You can see the chat over on the right side if you're looking, and tell us who you are and where you're from if it's your first time. We really appreciate having you. Just a really quick background on me, and then Steve will give his for those newcomers, and then we'll get rolling into today's webinar. So my name's Howie Scott. I was a law enforcement for 31 years. Started off working in incarceration. Then I went to the street. The majority of my career was spent on our full-time SWAT team, and into my career at the academy. Took 4 days off. Our founder, Brendan King, presented a job opportunity that I really had the opportunity to learn prior to retiring, and bought into it, and came on 4 days later and been rolling ever since with Crisis Consultant Group as the lead active threat instructor, and then crossed over also to be an instructor with the Calm Every Storm. So that's a little bit about me. And now let's go, Steve, talk about yourself.
Right on. Thanks, Howie. My name's Steve Naglosky. First 17 years of my professional career were working in residential juvenile males, 12 to 17, court ordered in. And I really ran the gamut from a frontline staff all the way to a program manager. Ran a group home for 5 years, same client base. And through that, we saw the importance of de-escalation. We actually brought Calm Every Storm in, and then during that time, got to meet Mr. King and learn the curriculum and began teaching regionally. And then about 5 years ago, came on full time because I was so passionate about the message and I know what it can do for facilities. So I'm the lead with Calm Every Storm portion, the verbal de-escalation, physical intervention, and I'm stoked to be here.
All right, so there's a little bit about us. If you guys do want any more information about who we are and what we do, please go ahead and visit our website. Tracy, who's our behind the scenes manager, is what I call her, because she runs everything. We just show up on camera, right? But she's going to be presenting the website in the chat box, and also there's going to be some polls that come out during this time frame for you to answer, and love to have your participation. Speaking about the chat box, you guys feel free to put in the chat if you have any questions or anything that might pertain to today's topic. We like to feed off of that, and we never stop learning. There's quite possibly something that's going to come up today in the chat that you guys do different than what Steve and I know, and we can pass it on to everybody else. So I'm really excited about today's topic, which is the importance of debriefing. Right. So we often know that we go into these incidents, and maybe at the place we're working at, something sparks off, something's escalated. It could be just verbal. It could get to the point where it's physical, and it's over. Right. And what do we do? And so if you can see right now, we're asking the question in the polls, do you currently practice debriefing, right? And how important is it? So just a little bit more about my background. I was thinking about this today when I was doing it. I know for a fact I've done over 1,500 debriefs, and it's probably closer to 5,000 debriefs, because we debriefed all our training revolutions, and we also debriefed all our live operations. So we got really, really good at debriefs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But Steve, talking about debriefing, I just wanted to ask you, how important do you find a debrief to be in a group setting like where you were working, and even outside of that setting, where you've gone out and taught? Just want to get some of your background, your experience on how important you thought debriefing was.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a great question. I really believe that debriefing is, if not the foundation, a cornerstone to culture change, and maintaining a healthy culture. It affords people the opportunity to be heard, and it helps prepare for the next crisis or the next challenge, to make sure that we're learning from these past experiences, so we become more proficient moving ahead. So debriefing is huge.
Right on. So, you'll see me writing things down every time Steve talks, because I learned something or something I want to steal from him. But the one thing that you said there, which I think is really important, is when you mentioned the word cornerstone. If you think what a cornerstone is traditionally used for, right? Everything is laid off of that. That's where the foundation comes from, and that's how you're able to build up, right? Without the cornerstone, you're not going to be able to build the building. So really important using that particular terminology to define how important debriefing is to you. So when we look over at the polls, we had 12 people answer, right? So I'm not a real good math guy, but guess what? I can figure out that half the people either do them sometimes or rarely. And we're missing some of the importance that can come out of debriefing. So Steve, I want you to think back about, when you were working in the group home and you
Sure.
had an incident come up. How did you guys conduct your briefings?
Okay, well, we actually did, it was two-part, because I always wanted to hear from staff, and I would rather get a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning and give me a heads up for what's happening than to walk in the next day just cold. So I'm a big fan of that informal debrief, and it can be really short. When staff's calling, telling me about an incident, I'm checking in. One of the first things I'm going to ask are you okay? Right? Because I want to make sure that the staff is in a good place physically and emotionally to continue their shift. And then that's going to be followed up by a formal debrief. But I always want to wait 24 hours or a full sleep cycle until we have that formal debrief. And that's where we'll really get into, if there had to be a serious incident report, really breaking down the fine points of it.
Right on. So yeah, looking at the debriefs, and so when I'm listening to you, I kind of get where you're going, but I don't. There's a distinction, I would say, between debriefs and pass on. Correct?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And I don't want that to be confused with being a debrief, even informal, right?
Right.
So let me ask you, when you were working in your facility, how often did you guys debrief non big exciting events? I mean, just the routine, maybe shift change, what happened, obviously get the pass on log, but how did debriefs go as far as maybe not such a critical incident, or did you always just debrief critical incidents?
Well, so we're required to, the significant incidents that require a SIR or a serious incident report that's sent into the state. All of those will be debriefed. When we're looking at the program as a whole, every Monday, we would break down the week's events, the previous week, and we would review plans moving into that next week. So really, we're breaking it down weekly.
Okay. So yeah, and I kind of thought that you guys did have a pretty thorough debriefing process based on conversations you and I've had in the past. And I wanted to, I worked for a really large law enforcement agency outside of Washington, D.C., and about 1,400 police officers. And I would say one of the critical things I would have to say about the patrol officers themselves, and really more on the supervisors, is they waited to critique big incidents, right?
Right.
They didn't critique maybe the routine event. And the problem, and let me preface with this, what Steve and I say here today is based on experience. It's not the way, it's a way, but it's been successful in two completely different careers.
Right.
But both of them had in common that they were debriefing on a regular basis. So one of the problems I think that, like I said, at the patrol level, and it really fell down upon the supervisor, and actually could go higher than that, because upper level management should be encouraging the debriefs to happen on the lesser incidents, because that gives you practice on those events to become better. So ultimately you become better on the big events. And that was our I guess our thinking as far as on the SWAT team, thinking, hey, we're going to debrief every incident, and we're going to debrief our training, because that's how we get better. I did not see that carrying over at a patrol level, where, and we actually got to the point where we started encouraging it, that if you have a domestic dispute, you debrief that and don't wait for the domestic violence or the bank robbery. And that's kind of how we dealt with it. Did you find yourselves at the group home or other places debriefing incidents of smaller scale?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it would be two-part. First of all, the relationship that I have with the staff. If I have a newer staff coming in, I'm going to spend more time in a formal debrief at what may be considered a smaller incident, because each interaction we have with clients is a learning opportunity. And so we want to take advantage of that. And as I'm helping staff acclimate to the position or learning the group dynamic, there's a lot of benefits to those debriefs where we're looking at those interactions, and staff really being self-aware.
Really good. I don't know if you, while I'm speaking here, if you can look over in the chat, but I think it's motion to just put in there. Really good point, especially when you're working in facilities where you may see the same folks over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And does debriefings just have to be with your coworkers or staff, right? Is it possible that you go and debrief? And we talk about this in our and Calm Every Storm in the ERLs, right?
Right.
So I'm going to ask you now, Steve, with that ERL, what particular ERL are we talking about when we go back and we would, lack of a better term, a debrief with the client?
I need you to ask the question again.
Yeah. So when we talk about recognition, right?
Yep.
The ERL, and those are emotional response levels. So what is the client and staff members' conversation like during that particular point? Because I know in your facility, you saw the same kids day in and day out.
Right. Yep. Yeah, they were with us for long periods of time. With
So if you
some over a year.
So if you had an incident,
Yep.
I would think, and this is where my experience doesn't carry over into your world. So like I see we have folks in here that are definitely seeing the same clients, patients over again or for duration, right? So did you find yourself or your staff debriefing with your clients?
Yes, absolutely. And so you were asking at what point we do that.
Yes.
Right. When I'm saying not even recognition, but cooperation.
Okay.
Is that point. And it may be, again, that sleep cycle later where I have that formal debrief with the client, and they may be back to baseline, which is ideal, because that's when the person is able to take on the most information.
Yeah, I mean, great point there, Steve. Pointing out when is a good time, especially to talk to a client or patient. And you know, your coworkers, you actually said a couple good things that I want to talk about there, because if it's not a critical incident where there's injury or harm to staff or clients, I think we can, probably conduct a debrief pretty shortly after.
Mm-hmm.
If there is one, the recommendations from the experts and Force Science Institute is where I got where I attended, and Dr. Bill Lewinsky, who is the lead at Force Science, actually came out with the fact of allowing at least 1 to 2 sleep cycles after a critical incident before debrief. Other than his statement of everyone's well-being of mental and physical health,
Right.
it's probably best to allow that at least 1 full sleep cycle, if not 2, to get better memory recall. What happens if we do that less than that is we start to mind gap fill, and they're like, "Hey, the guy that assaulted you, did he have a blue shirt on?" And you're like, "Yeah, it was blue."
Right.
Day later, I remember it's red. But so I think it's a really important point when you talk about sleep cycles, and you also talk about client patient, letting them have an opportunity to return back to baseline before we start an actual debrief with them. Because it is different. I mean, when you look at RNs and people that are in the chat today that are working in hospitals or probation, they see a client over and over again, that incident that became escalated is going to need to be talked about, not only with staff, but also with the offender or the patient or client. You agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And that taking that time to debrief with the client, not only are you going to identify what the client is identifying as potential triggers, but it's also that relationship and rapport building. So you're doing any trust that may have been lost or emotions that are harbored. We can work through those so we can move on cleanly, and be back to a therapeutic setting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, once again, why I like having your expertise on here talking about, this topic. So moving on, I'd like to talk about, what do you think are some of the things that are gained by debriefing? And before you go, I'm going to say a couple things so I have things left to say. Right? I can say them first.
Fair enough.
And first, when conducting debriefs, I've always found it beneficial to use the Caesar Milan method, the dog whisperer.
Right.
Praise, correction, praise. Right. We don't want to go in these debriefs and beating people down, but we can often find something they did good, something they could do better, and then overall, let them know that what they did was, if it was satisfactory or was good. But I think people need to hear some positive if we're going to be addressing any negative, or things they could have done better. And that's often how I try to phrase it. I think we could have done this better. And I throw we in there because we're a team, right? I think we could have, put 2 guys into that room as opposed to just letting the guy go in by himself. Everybody knows that's wrong, but it's a nicer way of saying it, right? Because as soon as you start introducing critical sometimes, or what I call constructive behavior, or trying to become better, I think you start to lose people because pride and ego gets in the way, right? And some people are just not willing to listen to constructive criticism to become better. And that's the overall objective, I think, is to become better. So I would say, 1, it improves communication. It can improve morale. If you have good, honest, open debriefs, everybody feels as though they're part of the team and their suggestion is being heard and possibly being employed. And then I think it definitely encourages new training, because when we find a training scar that has made its way to the floors or out into the public, we need to address that and find the type of training where we can overcome that. And then I think debriefing is a form of training. It's often the incident put on a tabletop. So there's my top 4. You get to go now.
All right. So I agree with the Caesar Milan method as far as praise, correction, praise. I also think it's really important as a supervisor to offer people the opportunity to offload, right? We need to vent, and not that it's not going to be long, but it may be a couple minutes, because I have to remember that the people involved in that crisis, it's stressful. And sometimes we just need that opportunity to be heard. And so I'll give up to 5 minutes of offloading where, and it comes from clients too. Clients, well, this staff, they're out to get me. They're doing X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to correct them right in that moment. I'm going to give them that opportunity to talk. But when we come back to the constructive portion, that's going to be addressed. And yeah, I agree with all four of your points. I think too often debriefing has debriefing has the feeling of that it's punitive, and it really doesn't need to be. We should go into a debrief honestly excited because we have the potential to avoid this problem from occurring again. And if everybody did everything right, staff did everything right throughout that incident, then there's a lot of successes that we have to celebrate too, because there is that 1% of the population that maybe we aren't able to de-escalate. Then where were staff? Where were they placed? How did we move in? Did we move in unison? Did everybody stay safe? And if that's the outcome, then we need to make sure that we're recognizing that and all of the things that staff did well.
Yeah. I mean, once again, you made a lot of good points. I think also along with debriefing, if we give people the opportunity to open up, like you were saying, we can discover other problems, right? And so, yeah, Tracy, thanks for throwing that out there. That brings up a good question. Should rank be off the table when debriefing? So I think, Steve, you being a supervisor, I think a lot of times the supervisor can set the tone of the debrief by coming in and being self-critiquing themselves, what they could have done better, right? If the supervisor's not willing to take constructive criticism, then that can definitely, everybody just says, I got nothing to add.
Right.
Because nothing's going to change, right? And we have had incidents, when we were doing debriefs where we had upper level echelon and majors coming in and, saying on the debrief, thinking that the debrief is going to be where rank was on the table, where you could pull rank. And they found out very quickly that it didn't matter. And that their lack of experience, and just because they were promoted into a position over special operations, that they knew everything, right? And they found out because you had a few alpha people there, right? And they were willing to let them know how important it was to have the debrief, and that the rank, although respected, was not going to deter them from voicing the truth. And that was quite a shock for some of the majors that came into the special operations division, because they hadn't encountered that before. One, they weren't doing debriefs, and most of the time when you saw them, they were coming down to either job well done or job not well done. So I think as a supervisor, you definitely have the opportunity to set the tone of the debrief, which should be open and honest, which should have rank off the table. Because that's the only way you learn, right? And then talking about debriefs, as far as experience, once again, on my part, we got to a point that we debriefed, like I said, everything, right? So we got to a point where we really started stinking up the joint with our debriefs, because all we did was talk about the good. Well, if it's good, you're not going to learn much from it because it's good, right? So we had to self-correct our debriefs and start thinking of from the time we exited to the time we left wherever we were going, and what could we have done better? And so it opened us up again to good, honest debriefs, because yes, like I said earlier, praise, correction, praise, but really the correction is the important part of making it better for the next time.
Absolutely. Yep. And I really feel as a supervisor, when I'm going into a debrief, I'm collecting information. And so I have an incident report, I have an outline of the incident, but I'm getting first person accounts, and I want to get that information from them, just as I'm going to with the client as well. And so the more information that I can get, the more educated my direction's going to be that I can offer to staff, so that we can, yeah, because if there's shortcomings, we got to identify them. We got to be open to working on them. But I'm collecting as much information as I can during that debrief.
Yeah, well, I was just looking at Amy's comment over there, so go ahead and take a look at that. Why I
All
pick
right.
up for you, and I think we can certainly jump on that for sure. So yeah, we talk about debrief. So I was at a major bank training, multiple locations, and they had incidents within their facilities, numerous ones, and I was really shocked that they can, because of the computer generation we're in, era we're in, that they conducted their debriefs via computer, right? And I was able to look at it. And I'm like, this was not even worth the time that you had people to take on it, because they couldn't see face to face. They couldn't have operations, how they could get better, how they could improve. And so one of the things I was looking at today, since I've learned that people actually do debriefs over the computer, they're more like filling out an incident report on a computer than really actual debrief. So they really didn't gain anything. We were able to get them through our course. That was our situational safety course we were doing for them, which included some of the de-escalation and then also some of the active threat response. But that particular company, they requested our debriefing form. So that was really helpful to them. So, okay, you got a chance to look at Amy's question there. Got anything on it?
Yeah, and I think that that's really a common issue, is finding the time. And as supervisors, it falls on us to build that culture, that climate where people are free to offer feedback, and they don't necessarily feel that they have to be concerned about backlash. And it's finding the time, and that if that's scheduling, an extra half hour the next day or 15 minutes where you truly can sit down and debrief and focus on the incident that you're discussing. When I talked about our Monday debriefs, right, that time was scheduled. I had additional staff that could come in, that could work with the clients. So I had the frontline direct care staff. We weren't going to be interrupted during the debrief. So allowing for that time to really have those insightful conversations.
Now, I mean, excellent point. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that we didn't have time to debrief.
Right.
And that's just another way of saying that I really don't care that much about it. And it hadn't happened in a long time. Probably won't happen again for a long time. And that's on the LE side. But yeah, that's not a good excuse, right? There's always time to improve and get better.
Right.
And if it's important to you, you find ways to make it happen, right? You make time for the things that are important. So, when we looked at this topic today, we wanted to talk about debriefing because we know that good, honest debriefs and the places that we've been to and taught that it's kind of a piece that's missing or gets taken care of really fast. And we just know how much good work has come out of debriefing from our both our careers prior to working for CCG. That's why we continue to preach it, how important it is. And so we just wanted to touch this and really kind of experience what we've gone through, what we've learned, how it can be beneficial to you, and just keep going out there and requesting the debriefs be done, and especially in the facilities where it happens sometimes or rarely. I think Steve, you'd probably answer this. I'll give you the final word, but if supervisors are having pressure to do debriefs, they're more than likely are going to conduct the debriefs.
Absolutely. Yep. Because that's your staff telling you there's an area that needs to be addressed. And as a supervisor or a shift leader, I'm going to find the time to facilitate those debriefs because I want my shift, I want it to run as smoothly as possible. And that little bit of work on the front end goes a long ways down road to avoid bigger crisis or the same crisis from reoccurring. So, yeah, debriefing is paramount. And if it becomes a focal point for us, we'll see growth throughout all of programming.
Great job, Steve. I appreciate it. Good getting back together with you today. I hope you all found this topic as important as Steve and I do. Once again, Tracy, thank you for all your help with the chat and the polls. If you do want a certificate, Tracy's got the information up there. And you guys take care of yourself the rest of the week and have a great weekend. We'll see you next Thursday. We'll have our topic coming out most likely sometime tomorrow afternoon. And we'll talk to you later.
Have a great weekend, everyone.